Regina Washington parked her car in the crowded lot of Pinnacle Banking's downtown branch. She glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek. She had just come from a community garden project where her foundation had donated supplies and labor. Her simple t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers were a far cry from the power suits she typically wore to business meetings, but today had been about getting her hands dirty for a good cause. The large check in her purse needed to be deposited before the weekend. It was a significant donation for her foundation's upcoming youth tech program, nearly $500,000 from a group of investors who believed in her vision. As Regina pushed through the heavy glass doors of the bank, she felt the cool air conditioning wash over her. The marble floors gleamed under bright lights, and the usual Friday afternoon crowd filled the space with hushed conversations and the occasional beep of the ticket machine. She took a number and waited, scrolling through emails on her phone. 20 minutes passed before her number flashed on the screen. Regina approached window number 4, where a thin man with neatly combed hair and a tight smile sat behind the glass. "Good afternoon," Regina said warmly. "I'd like to make a deposit, please." The teller, Michael Pearson, barely looked up from his computer. "ID," he said flatly, his eyes briefly scanning her casual appearance. Regina pulled out her driver's license and bank card, sliding them under the glass partition. Michael picked them up with the tips of his fingers, eyeing the cards with unusual scrutiny. "I also have a check to deposit," Regina said, sliding the folded check toward him. Michael unfolded the check, and his eyebrows shot up at the amount. He looked at Regina, then back at the check, his expression hardening. "This is a very large sum," he said loudly enough for nearby customers to hear. "Where did you get this money?" Regina felt her chest tighten slightly. "It's a donation for my foundation," she explained calmly. "I've been banking here for over 15 years. You can check my account history." Michael's mouth twisted into a smirk. "We have protocols for unusual deposits. I'll need to see additional identification and proof of the check's origin." Regina noticed that the white man at the next window was depositing a business check without any such questions. She took a deep breath. "I understand protocols, but I've made larger deposits before without any issues. Could you please check my account history?" "Look, ma'am," Michael said, emphasizing the word in a way that made it sound like an insult. "I'm just doing my job. If you can't provide what I'm asking for, you'll have to come back another time. Maybe dress a bit more professionally." A flush of anger and embarrassment washed over Regina's face. Before she could respond, Michael turned to reach for a form and knocked over his coffee cup. The dark liquid splashed across the counter and onto Regina's arm and shirt. "Oh!" Regina jumped back, but it was too late. Brown stains spread across her white t-shirt. Instead of apologizing, Michael sighed dramatically. "Now look what happened," he muttered, making no move to help. He casually tossed a few tissues under the partition. "You should be more careful," he added with a hint of blame in his voice. "Why don't you step aside so I can help the next customer? You can come back when you have the proper documentation and maybe a change of clothes." The branch manager, a woman in her 50s, glanced over at the commotion but hesitated to approach. Regina stood there, coffee dripping from her sleeve, holding a $500,000 check in her stained hands, as the weight of the humiliation settled on her shoulders. What Michael Pearson didn't know was that Regina Washington wasn't just any customer, and tomorrow his entire world would change because of what he had done today. Regina stood at the bank teller's window, coffee stains spreading across her white t-shirt. The smell of the spilled drink filled her nostrils as other customers stared. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from embarrassment, from anger. "I'd like to speak with your manager," Regina said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Michael rolled his eyes. "The manager is busy. Maybe you should come back another day when you've calmed down." Regina took a deep breath. She had built a tech company from nothing, navigated boardrooms full of dismissive men, and closed deals worth millions. This small man behind his glass partition would not be the one to break her composure. "I've been a client at this bank for 15 years, she said, loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "I'm not leaving until someone addresses what just happened." A woman in line behind Regina stepped forward. "I saw everything. That was completely unprofessional," she said, pointing at Michael. Michael's face flushed red. "Ma'am, you're holding up the line. There are other customers waiting." "Then call your manager," Regina insisted. The branch manager, who had been watching from a distance, finally approached. Her name tag read, Patricia Reynolds. "What seems to be the problem?" Patricia asked, her eyes darting between Regina's coffee-stained shirt and Michael's defensive posture. Before Regina could explain, Michael jumped in. "This woman is trying to deposit a suspicious check and causing a scene because I followed protocol." Regina felt her patience snap. "A suspicious check? You didn't even look at my account history before making that judgment. And then you spilled coffee on me and didn't even apologize." Patricia's eyes widened slightly. "Let's discuss this in my office," she said, gesturing toward a glass-walled room at the back of the bank. "I'm not leaving until this deposit is processed," Regina said firmly, "and I want it noted that I was treated differently from other customers." Michael scoffed. "You're not being treated differently. We require proper identification for large deposits from everyone." "The man at window 2 just deposited a business check without any questions," Regina pointed out. "You didn't ask him where his money came from or tell him to dress more professionally." Several customers nodded in agreement. Patricia's professional smile faltered. "Of course we'll process your deposit, Ms." Patricia paused, waiting for a name. "Washington. Regina Washington." Patricia's face changed instantly. She knew exactly who Regina Washington was. Everyone in banking circles did. The founder of Washington Tech Solutions, whose company accounts represented millions in assets for Pinnacle Banking. "Ms. Washington, I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding," Patricia said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Please come to my office. I'll handle your deposit personally." Michael's smug expression froze as he heard the name. He'd seen it countless times on bank reports and newsletters. Regina Washington wasn't just a client. She was practically royalty at Pinnacle Banking. "There's no misunderstanding," Regina said. "Your teller made assumptions about me based on how I look today, not on my history with this bank." Patricia turned to Michael. "Process Ms. Washington's deposit immediately." Michael's hands shook as he reached for the check. I didn't realize. That's the problem," Regina said quietly. "You shouldn't treat anyone this way, regardless of who they are or how much money they have." As Michael processed the deposit, dropping papers and fumbling with his keyboard, Regina noticed other customers watching with interest. Some were recording the interaction on their phones. This wasn't just about her anymore. When Michael finally handed her the deposit slip, Regina looked him directly in the eyes. "I hope our interaction today makes you think about how you treat people tomorrow." Patricia touched Regina's arm gently. "Ms. Washington, please allow me to get you something for your shirt and then discuss how we can make this right." Regina nodded, suddenly tired. As she followed Patricia to her office, she could hear Michael being instructed to close his window by another manager who had rushed over. What had started as a simple bank errand had turned into something much bigger. And Regina knew from experience that this was just the beginning of what would become a very public lesson about respect, power, and the consequences of judgment. Patricia Reynolds closed her office door, offering Regina a seat in a plush leather chair. The bank manager's hands trembled slightly as she poured water from a crystal pitcher into a glass. "Ms. Washington, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am for what happened today," Patricia said, handing Regina the water. "Would you like a clean shirt? I keep extras in my office for emergencies." Regina shook her head. "The stain isn't my concern right now." Patricia nodded, sitting across from Regina. "I understand." Michael's behavior was completely unacceptable. "It was more than unacceptable," Regina replied. "It was discriminatory. And I suspect it's not the first time it's happened here." Patricia looked down at her desk, unable to meet Regina's eyes. I should have stepped in sooner." The phone on Patricia's desk rang. She glanced at the caller ID and her face paled. "It's the regional director." "Answer it," Regina said. Patricia picked up the phone with a shaking hand. "Yes, Mr. Chen. Yes, she's in my office now. I understand." "Right away." She hung up and looked at Regina with new respect and a touch of fear. "Mr. Chen would like to speak with you personally. He's on his way." Regina wasn't surprised. News traveled fast in banking circles. While they waited, Patricia pulled up Regina's account information on her computer. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the numbers. "I didn't realize the full extent," Patricia whispered, more to herself than to Regina. Regina smiled slightly. "Most people don't. That's rather the point, isn't it?" Washington Tech Solutions maintained its primary accounts at Pinnacle Banking. Daily transactions often exceeded millions. Regina's personal accounts held substantial sums as well. Her foundation deposited and distributed grants worth tens of millions annually. All told, Regina's business represented over $300 million in assets for the bank. A knock at the door interrupted them. A distinguished older man in an expensive suit entered without waiting for an answer. Thomas Chen, Regional Director of Pinnacle Banking, looked like he hadn't caught his breath from rushing over. "Ms. Washington," he said warmly, extending his hand. "What an unexpected pleasure to see you today, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Regina shook his hand firmly. "Mr. Chen, it's been a while." "The last charity gala, I believe," he said, taking a seat next to Patricia. "I've just been briefed about the unfortunate incident. Rest assured we're taking immediate action." "What kind of action?" Regina asked. "Michael Pearson has been suspended pending investigation. He'll likely be terminated." Regina leaned forward. "Firing one teller doesn't solve the underlying problem." Thomas nodded seriously. "You're absolutely right, which is why I'd like to discuss how we can address this systematically." Patricia's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and looked up in alarm. "Sir, there's something you need to know. The incident was recorded by another customer. It's already on social media and gaining traction." Thomas closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this new information. When he opened them, he looked directly at Regina. "We need to get ahead of this." "Actually," Regina said, "I think this presents an opportunity, not just for damage control, but for real change." "What are you suggesting?" Thomas asked. "I was going to quietly move my accounts to another bank," Regina said. "But perhaps there's a better solution." Both bankers leaned forward, suddenly eager to hear what their biggest client had to say. "Before I share my thoughts," Regina said, reaching for her phone, "I should tell you that my executive team is waiting for my call. They're prepared to begin transferring our accounts first thing Monday morning." The color drained from Thomas's face. Losing Washington Tech Solutions would not only impact their bottom line, it would make headlines in the financial world and raise serious questions from shareholders. "Please," Thomas said quietly. "Tell us what you want us to do." Regina looked at them both thoughtfully. The power dynamic had shifted completely, not because of her money, but because of what that money represented: influence, respect, and the ability to create change. The same teller who had dismissed her an hour ago was now facing unemployment. The same manager who had hesitated to help was now offering her personal belongings. "Let's talk about systemic discrimination in banking," Regina said, "and how Pinnacle Banking is going to take the lead in addressing it." The morning after the incident, Regina's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The video had gone viral overnight, reaching millions of views across several platforms. Local news stations had picked up the story, and even a few national outlets were beginning to run segments about banking while black. Regina sat at her kitchen island, sipping coffee and scrolling through the flood of messages. Her executive assistant, Tanya, had organized them into categories: media requests, support messages, and business matters. "The bank president has called," 4 times, Tanya said, setting down a plate of toast in front of Regina. "They're in full crisis mode." Regina nodded, watching as another notification appeared on her screen. "And how are our people handling this?" "The board wants an emergency meeting. They're worried about being associated with Pinnacle Banking now. 3 members suggested we move our accounts immediately." Regina considered this. Washington Tech Solutions employed over 500 people, many of whom came from underrepresented backgrounds in tech. She had built the company with a clear mission of creating pathways for talented individuals who might otherwise be overlooked. Schedule the board meeting for noon, Regina said, making a decision. And tell Davis to prepare the paperwork for transferring our accounts. We should have options ready. Across town at Pinnacle Banking's headquarters, chaos reigned. Richard Wilson, the bank's president, paced in the conference room where senior executives sat in uncomfortable silence. The PR team had prepared statements, none of which felt adequate. The stock is already down 3%, the chief financial officer reported grimly. Investors are nervous. 3%? Richard snapped. If we lose Washington Tech Solutions, we'll be looking at a much bigger drop. They represent almost 8% of our commercial portfolio. The chief marketing officer cleared her throat. It's not just about losing one client, sir. The publicity is devastating. We're being painted as institutionally racist. 2 other major corporate clients have already called asking questions. Richard stopped pacing. Get me Washington Tech's financial records. I want to know exactly what we stand to lose. The records painted a sobering picture. Beyond the immediate financial impact lay potential regulatory scrutiny and lasting reputation damage. Richard realized this wasn't just about placating one angry client. It was about the bank's very future. Meanwhile, in a small apartment across the city, Michael Pearson sat on his couch, head in his hands. His phone had been ringing nonstop with calls from friends and family who had seen the video. His sister had called in tears, asking how he could have acted that way. I didn't mean it like that, he had tried to explain. I was just following protocol. But watching the video himself, seeing his behavior through others' eyes, had shaken him. Had he really spoken to her that way? Would he have treated a white customer the same? The questions kept him awake all night. A text message illuminated his phone. Mandatory meeting with HR tomorrow morning. At noon, Regina addressed her board of directors. The company's sleek conference room was tense as she explained what had happened. I know many of you want immediate action, she said, looking around the table. And part of me wanted that too. An older board member spoke up. Regina, we should move our accounts today. Send a message. Regina nodded thoughtfully. That would certainly feel satisfying. But I've been thinking about the bigger picture. What happens after we leave? Does anything actually change at Pinnacle or at any other bank? The room fell silent as people considered her words. We have leverage right now, Regina continued. We have their attention in a way that few customers ever do. Instead of simply walking away, what if we use this moment to create lasting change? The board listened as Regina outlined her plan. By the time she finished speaking, the initial anger had transformed into something more powerful. Purpose. That afternoon, Richard Wilson's assistant interrupted his crisis meeting with news that Regina Washington was on the phone. He grabbed the receiver, prepared to beg. Ms. Washington, he said, voice carefully controlled. Thank you for taking my call. Actually, Mr. Wilson, Regina replied calmly. I called you. I'd like to schedule a meeting, not just with you, but with your entire executive team and board of directors. I have a proposal that might be interesting to all of you. Richard agreed immediately, relief flooding his voice. One more thing, Regina added. I'd like Michael Pearson to be there too. The Pinnacle Banking headquarters buzzed with nervous energy. The large conference room had been meticulously prepared. Fresh flowers adorned the center of the polished table. Water pitchers and glasses sat at each place setting, and folders containing the day's agenda waited at every seat. Richard Wilson stood at the window, watching as Regina Washington's car pulled up to the building. He straightened his tie and took a deep breath. Is everyone ready? He asked, looking around at his executive team and selected board members. Patricia Reynolds, who had been asked to attend the meeting, nodded tensely. In the corner, Michael Pearson sat alone, looking uncomfortable in his best suit. He hadn't been fired yet, but had been suspended without pay pending this meeting. Remember, Richard reminded everyone, we listen first. No interrupting, no defending, we hear what Ms. Washington has to say. The door opened and Regina entered. She wasn't alone. Behind her came 4 people. Her lawyer, her chief operating officer, a diversity consultant, and surprisingly, an older, black woman whom no one recognized. "Thank you for meeting with us," Regina said as introductions were made around the table. Richard nodded deferentially. "We appreciate the opportunity to address what happened. As I mentioned on the phone, we've prepared compensation options and—" Regina held up her hand. "This isn't about compensation, Mr. Wilson. If it were, I would have simply sued the bank and been done with it." The room fell silent. "Before we begin," Regina continued, "I'd like to introduce you to someone. This is Mrs. Helen Taylor. She was my fourth-grade teacher, and she taught me an important lesson about responding to injustice." Mrs. Taylor smiled warmly at the group. "I've known Regina since she was 9 years old. Even then, she didn't just complain about problems, she solved them." Regina smiled at her former teacher before turning back to the bank executives. "What happened to me last week wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't just one teller having a bad day." Michael Pearson looked down at his hands, his face flushed. "Since the video went viral," Regina continued, "my office has received over 200 messages from people sharing similar experiences at banks across the country. People being questioned about their own money, people watching others get faster, friendlier service, people feeling unwelcome in financial institutions that are supposed to serve everyone equally." Richard Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "Ms. Washington, we take full responsibility for what happened in our branch and we're committed to making changes." "What kind of changes?" Regina asked. "Well, we're implementing sensitivity training for all customer-facing staff, reviewing our protocols for large deposits and—" Regina's diversity consultant, Dr. Liu, interrupted gently. "If I may, Mr. Wilson, those are good first steps, but they address symptoms rather than causes." Regina nodded in agreement. "I'm not here to shame Pinnacle Banking or to take my business elsewhere, though I could easily do both. I'm here because I believe you have an opportunity to lead real change in the banking industry." She opened her laptop and turned it to face the room. A presentation appeared on the wall screen. Not angry demands, but a comprehensive proposal titled Banking Equity Initiative. "My team has spent the past week developing this program," Regina explained. "It includes updated policies, hiring practices, community engagement strategies, and accountability measures that would position Pinnacle as a leader in equitable banking." The bank executives leaned forward, surprised by the constructive approach. Regina continued, "The program would require a significant investment, about $20 million over 5 years." Several executives exchanged alarmed glances. "That's a substantial amount," Richard said cautiously. "It is," Regina agreed. "But consider the alternative. My company's accounts represent over $300 million in assets for your bank. The negative publicity from this incident has already affected your stock price, and regulatory bodies are paying attention." Regina's lawyer spoke up. "We've already been contacted by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They're interested in reviewing Pinnacle's practices." Richard nodded slowly, beginning to understand the full scope of what they were facing. "There's one more thing," Regina said, turning to look directly at Michael Pearson. "I don't want Mr. Pearson fired." Michael's head snapped up in surprise. "Instead," Regina continued, "I want him to work with the implementation team for this initiative. I want him to see firsthand how unconscious bias affects people, and I want him to be part of the solution." The room was completely silent now. "Ms. Washington," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything right now," Regina replied, "but I'd like to hear your thoughts after you've had time to review the proposal." Richard Wilson looked at Regina with new respect. "We'll need time to review everything in detail. But speaking personally, I'm impressed by your approach. Most people in your position would just want retribution." Regina shook her head. "Retribution might feel good for a moment, but it doesn't create lasting change, and that's what I'm interested in. Not just for myself, but for everyone who walks into a bank and deserves to be treated with dignity." As the meeting continued, the atmosphere shifted from tense to thoughtful, from defensive to collaborative. By the time they broke for lunch, The beginnings of something unexpected had emerged. Hope. 3 weeks after the meeting, Michael Pearson stood nervously outside Regina Washington's office. The Washington Tech Solutions headquarters was nothing like he had imagined. Bright, open spaces filled with diverse employees who seemed genuinely happy to be there. A far cry from the stuffy bank where he'd worked for the past 5 years. Checked his reflection in a glass panel, straightening his tie for the 10th time. As part of Regina's proposal, Michael had been temporarily assigned to work with her diversity team. Today was his first day. Regina's assistant looked up from her desk. "She's ready for you now," she said with a professional smile. Michael took a deep breath and entered the office. Regina was standing by the window looking out at the city skyline. She turned as he came in. "Good morning, Mr. Pearson," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Please have a seat." "Thank you for this opportunity," Michael said, his voice tight with anxiety. "I know I don't deserve it." Regina sat across from him. "This isn't about what you deserve. It's about creating meaningful change, and sometimes that starts with uncomfortable conversations." For the next hour they talked. Really talked. Michael explained how he'd grown up in a small town with little diversity, how his father and uncles had shaped his views without him really questioning them. Regina shared stories of the countless small indignities she'd faced throughout her career, despite her success. "I never thought of myself as prejudiced," Michael admitted, his eyes downcast. "But watching that video of myself, I didn't recognize the person I saw." Regina nodded. "That's actually a good sign. Recognizing the problem is the first step toward fixing it." She handed him a folder. "Here's your assignment for the next 3 months. You'll be working with our team to develop training modules for Pinnacle employees. Your perspective as someone who's been on the front lines will be valuable." Meanwhile, at Pinnacle Banking headquarters, Richard Wilson was facing tough questions from his board of directors. $20 million is an enormous investment, one board member argued. Shareholders will revolt. Richard remained calm. "The alternative could cost us 10 times that amount. Washington Tech Solutions alone represents more than that in revenue for us, not to mention the potential legal ramifications if we don't address this systematically." Another board member, an older woman, spoke up. "I think we're missing the bigger picture here. This isn't just about appeasing one client or avoiding lawsuits. It's about doing what's right." The debate continued for hours. By the end, the room was divided, but Richard had secured enough support to move forward with what was now being called the Banking Equity Initiative. Back at Washington Tech, Michael spent his first week observing. He sat in on meetings, listened to employee focus groups, and read through countless testimonials from people who had experienced discrimination in financial settings. In the employee cafeteria, he sat alone until Dr. Liu, Regina's diversity consultant, joined him. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Michael shook his head. "It's overwhelming. I keep thinking about all the people I might have treated poorly without even realizing it." Dr. Liu nodded sympathetically. "That guilt can be paralyzing if you let it, but it can also be motivating if you channel it properly." As the weeks passed, Michael threw himself into the work. He helped design training scenarios based on real experiences. He reviewed bank policies with fresh eyes, identifying problematic language and procedures. He even recorded a video talking honestly about his own awakening. The first test of the new initiative came when Pinnacle rolled out comprehensive training to its staff. Initial reactions were mixed. Some employees embraced the changes while others grumbled about political correctness gone too far. During one particularly heated training session, a senior teller complained, "This is just making our jobs harder. We can't question anyone now without being called racist." The trainer, a young black woman, responded calmly, "Actually, we're teaching you to question everyone equally, using the same criteria and the same respectful approach regardless of how they look." Michael, who was observing the session, raised his hand. "Can I say something?" When the trainer nodded, Michael stood up. His former colleagues looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and resentment. "A month ago, I would have said exactly what You just said, he told the senior teller. I thought I was just following protocol. But what I've learned is that we all have blind spots, ways we treat people differently without even realizing it. The room fell silent as he continued. I nearly lost my career because of those blind spots, but more importantly, I hurt someone. I made her feel less than human in her own bank. Is that really the kind of service we want to provide? After the session, several tellers approached Michael, asking questions, sharing their own experiences. Something was shifting, slowly but surely. That evening, as Michael packed up to leave Washington Tech for the day, Regina stopped by his temporary office. I heard you spoke up in the training today, she said. Michael nodded. It felt important to share my perspective. Regina studied him thoughtfully. You know, when I first suggested you be part of this project, I wasn't sure if you'd truly engage or just go through the motions to save your job. Honestly, I wasn't sure either, Michael admitted. But this has become about so much more than my job. Regina smiled. That's exactly what transformation looks like. 1 year had passed since that fateful day at Pinnacle Banking. The morning, sun streamed through the windows of the bank's largest branch as employees gathered for a special ceremony. The lobby had been transformed with flowers and a small stage where Richard Wilson stood behind a podium, addressing the crowd of employees, community members, and journalists. Today marks the first anniversary of our Banking Equity Initiative, Richard announced, his voice carrying through the spacious lobby. What began as a painful incident has grown into something we're genuinely proud of. In the front row, Regina Washington sat quietly, watching as Richard detailed the changes Pinnacle had implemented over the past year. New hiring practices had increased diversity at all levels of the organization. Community banking centers had opened in previously underserved neighborhoods. Loan approval rates showed consistent treatment across all demographics for the first time in the bank's history. None of this would have been possible without the courage and vision of Regina Washington, Richard continued, gesturing toward her. When faced with discrimination, she could have simply taken her business elsewhere. Instead, she challenged us to be better. The audience applauded as Regina rose to join Richard at the podium. She scanned the crowd, noting familiar faces from her team mixed with bank employees. Near the back, she spotted Michael Pearson standing with a group of tellers. He looked different now, more confident, but also more thoughtful. Thank you all for being here today, Regina began. A year ago, I walked into this bank wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and I was judged for how I looked rather than who I was. She paused, letting the words sink in. That judgment led to a confrontation that could have ended many ways. It could have ended in anger, in lawsuits, in divisions that would never heal. But instead it became an opportunity for growth. The room was completely silent as she continued. The Banking Equity Initiative wasn't just about changing policies, on paper. It was about changing hearts and minds. It was about recognizing that true service means seeing each person who walks through these doors as an individual worthy of respect. In the months following the incident, Pinnacle had become an unlikely leader in banking equity. Other financial institutions had begun to adopt similar programs, some voluntarily and others under pressure from customers and advocacy groups. What had started as one bank's crisis response was slowly reshaping industry standards. After the speeches, a small reception was held in the bank's community room. Regina chatted with local business owners who shared stories of how the improved banking relationships had helped their companies grow. As the crowd thinned, Michael Pearson approached Regina, a folder tucked under his arm. Ms. Washington, he said, extending his hand. I wanted to thank you personally before I head out. Regina shook his hand. How are things going with the community outreach program? After his 3-month assignment at Washington Tech, Michael had returned to Pinnacle, not as a teller but as part of the newly formed community banking team. He now spent his days visiting schools and community centers, teaching financial literacy and helping people navigate banking systems. It's the most meaningful work I've ever done, Michael admitted. Yesterday, I helped a woman open her first business account. She told me she'd been turned away from 3 other banks. Regina nodded, understanding the significance. And how did that feel? It felt right, Michael said simply. Like I was finally doing what I should have been doing all along. He handed her the folder he'd been carrying. I wanted you to see this. It's our new training manual. Your story is in there, with your permission, of course. We use it as a case study for all new employees. Regina opened the folder and skimmed the pages. There it was, the incident described factually, without excuses or justifications. The narrative didn't portray Michael as a villain or Regina as a victim, but rather showed how unconscious bias could affect real people in real situations. This is well done, she said, closing the folder. You've come a long way. Michael looked down for a moment. I still have days when I catch myself making assumptions. I don't think that ever fully goes away. But now I recognize it when it happens. As the reception ended, Regina walked back through the bank lobby. She paused at teller window 4, the very spot where it had all begun. A young woman now stood where Michael had once been, warmly greeting an elderly customer who was making a deposit. Outside, Regina's assistant waited with the car. How did it go? She asked as Regina slid into the back seat. Regina watched the bank building recede as they pulled away. It went well, better than I expected, actually. So it was worth it? All the time and energy? Regina thought about the question. The past year had been challenging. There had been resistance, setbacks, and moments when she'd questioned whether real change was possible. But there had also been breakthroughs, allies who emerged from unexpected places, and concrete improvements that affected real people's lives. Yes, she said finally. It was worth it. Sometimes the hardest confrontations lead to the most important transformations. As the car merged into traffic, Regina opened her laptop to prepare for her next meeting. On her calendar was a lunch appointment with the CEO of another major bank who wanted to discuss implementing their own version of the equity initiative. The work was far from over, but a door had been opened that couldn't easily be closed again, and it had all started with one person being seen, truly seen for who she was rather than how she appeared on a busy Friday afternoon.